My name is Alex, and I never thought that a simple camping trip could turn into a nightmare. The original idea was just to spend a night with my three best friends, Mia, Ethan, and Daniel, at the foot of Mount Fuji, record some interesting moments, and tell some mysterious stories around the campfire. But from the moment we set foot in the Aokigahara Forest, we felt an indescribable heavy pressure. The forest was so quiet that the sound of footsteps echoed as if being reflected. The trees grew densely, moss covered from root to trunk, making everything look like a painting covered in living darkness. When we finished setting up the tent and lit the fire, the sky gradually turned grey. The light faded faster than usual. Daniel hung a small wind chime in front of the tent. It shook gently, but was silent without making any sound. Ethan checked the camera. The screen flickered. For a moment, I saw a blurry shadow pass behind him, but when I turned around, there was nothing but the shadow of a tree. Mia worriedly said that the compass was spinning non-stop, and the map in her hand deviated from the direction we had just gone. I tried to reassure myself that it was all due to the abnormal magnetic field, but fear rose in my heart. As the night fell, the cold wind blew in. The campfire flickered, but was not enough to dispel the cold that penetrated to the bones. We began to tell each other a few true stories about people who had gone missing in this forest. Each story made the atmosphere more tense. Suddenly, from deep in the forest came a strange sound. At first small, like the sound of dry leaves being stepped on, then gradually became clearer into the sound of slow footsteps. The whole group sat still, their eyes turned towards the pitch darkness. Ethan quickly panned the camera into the distance. The screen showed a faint blue light, like the silhouette of a person silently watching. I held my breath. Goosebumps rose all over my body, and at that moment, the wind chime in front of the tent rang for the first time. The long ringing sound, like the sound of metal echoing from underground. We realized that Aokigahara did not welcome strangers. It was just starting its game of leading the way. And the terrifying path the real emperor starts in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the group, and I took the right turn. The air suddenly became thick, as if an invisible hand was pressing down on our chests. Breathing became labored, and the light from our headlamps was distorted into blurs that didn't reach more than a few feet. The forest changed bit by bit like an automatic maze. The trees grew thicker. The roots curved into rib-like shapes. Each step echoed with an unusual cracking sound, as if we were stepping on things that didn't belong in the forest. I heard the whisper again, but this time it was clearer. No longer vague, but a short, repetitive sentence. Go forward, don't look back, just go straight. Ethan held the compass tightly in his trembling hand, the needle spinning as if hypnotized. Mia kept adding reflective strips. But when we had gone 10 meters, the strips behind had completely disappeared, as if someone had taken them off. Daniel turned to me, his eyes flashing with fear for the first time, but he tried to hide it with a faint smile. I realized that despite their outward appearance, I kept calm, but everyone was quietly panicking. Suddenly, there was a faint smell of smoke, very faint, but enough to remind me of the smell of campfires when camping by the lake in my childhood. The only difference was that this smell of smoke had a metallic taste. We walked faster, and at that moment, a dim light flared up in front of us, like the fire of a small camp. The group stopped. My heart was pounding. If there really was someone camping in this forest, why would they sit in the middle of a dangerous place and not return? We got closer. I saw the shadow of an old, tattered tent, the fabric faded, the poles broken and crooked. In front of the tent was a circle of stones stacked as a stove, but the ashes had long since cooled. Next to it were 3 rotten backpacks, with moss still clinging to them. When I bent down to try to open one, the rusty zipper broke off. Inside was nothing but a damp, tattered notebook with pages stuck together. I flipped through a few lines of scribbled words written in a blue ballpoint pen. The content was almost hopeless, saying that I had gotten lost many times. Day, no longer seeing the exit, the whispering did not let go, and the last line had only 2 large, trembling words, true stories. I handed the notebook to Daniel, his face pale. Ethan suddenly cried out softly when he discovered that underneath the pile of cold ashes there were still a few dry sticks left, but they had been rearranged not long ago. There was no way they would be this rotten if they had been left for many years. That meant that this place had just been touched by someone, or something had just rearranged it. Mia trembled and pointed towards a nearby tree trunk. On the bark were carved many diagonal lines, like day markers. Stopping at the number 47, below there was a deep knife mark forming an arrow pointing straight to the path we had just passed. No one said anything, but everyone understood that the other group had either disappeared in that very path, or were trying to warn the next person. I suddenly heard a very small laugh, like a child's voice, but coming from deep in the darkness. The whole group stopped breathing. The laughter lasted and then stopped abruptly. We turned around to leave, when we discovered that the torn tent had just disappeared, gone. No trace left but the cold bare ground. Only the notebook in my hand. I stuffed it into my pocket and told everyone to keep going. But in my heart I knew we were being led. The whispering came back, this time more in unison, like many voices, overlapping each other. Keep going. There was so much more to see. I glanced at the recorder. The red light was still flashing, but when it was played back, I could only hear heavy breathing, interspersed with whispering voices, not our footsteps, which meant there were other footsteps coming along. We picked up speed. With each step, the forest seemed to thicken. As the flashlight passed, I caught glimpses of pieces of cloth, old shoes, even broken glass frames stuck in the roots. Evidence of people who had gone before, never returning. Finally, a crack of light appeared, different from the orange light of the tent just now. This crack of light was pale green, like fluorescent light leaking from a crevice in the rocks. We stopped, our hearts pounding. I felt the thin rope tying us into the tree beside him that was shaking slightly, as if someone was pulling at the other end. Daniel asked if he should turn back, but when he looked back, the path turned into thick darkness. There was no more path, no more reflective tape, only a series of vertical tree shadows like a wall. I turned back towards the green light. Although scared but had no choice, I knew that the only way was to move forward, and I also knew that what was waiting for us at that crack of light would not stop at a haunted tent. It was the beginning of another deep level of this maze, and the truth was waiting to be revealed in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, we walked closer to the pale green light. Each heavy step seemed to be pulled down by an invisible force. The forest behind had closed into a wall of darkness, so turning back was no longer an option. Green light oozed from a gap between 2 large mossy rocks. The gap was just enough for one person to crawl through. Ethan shined his flashlight in, but the light was immediately swallowed up. leaving only a cold green like phosphorescence. I reached out to touch the surface of the rock and felt a chill run down my spine, as if the rock was alive and breathing. Mia hesitated. Her eyes flashed with fear, but the familiar whisper echoed in unison. "Keep going, keep going." That whisper was no longer far away, but right next to her ears. Daniel took a deep breath and crawled into the rock cracked first. We followed. Inside was a short, damp tunnel. The walls were wet and smelled fishy. Stepping out of the tunnel, we stood in a strange space. Trees grew in circles like walls. In the center was a giant tree stump giant, with roots as big as a human body. The roots stretched out like arms wrapped around the ground. Green light radiated from the cracks on the tree trunk, making the whole area dimly lit. Daniel whispered that this was like a natural shrine. I looked closely and saw countless small wooden stakes planted around the base of the tree. On each stake hung a piece of faded cloth. Many pieces had shaky writing in many languages, including English. I bent down to read a few lines. Words begging for forgiveness, curses. There were lines saying revenge stories, as if someone still carried hatred before disappearing. Mia clasped her hands in prayer. Her eyes were full of fear, but Ethan leaned over to record. The camera shook violently, as if affected by some force. In the lens appeared blurry shadows passing by, but the naked eye could not see. I heard light footsteps echoing around the empty area, as if someone was walking in circles around us. The air suddenly turned cold. Breath turned into white mist. Daniel bit his lip and whispered that we should not stay here long. I nodded, but his legs were still held tight. The tree trunk made a creaking sound like bones rubbing. From the crack, the blue light poured out stronger. I saw in the light the shape of a skinny hand reaching out. My heart tightened. I pulled the whole group back, but behind us was now covered by a thick fog. Like a door had just closed. The whispers changed rhythm, from orders to choked laughter, mixed with crying. The sounds overlapped to the point that it seemed like there were dozens of people surrounding. Ethan screamed when he discovered a piece of cloth in front of him vibrating even though there was no wind. I looked closely and saw my name clearly written on it in scribbles. I trembled and took the cloth down. The inside was stained with incomprehensible symbols like a spell. I clearly felt an invisible weight pressing on my shoulder. The breathing was close to the back of my neck. I turned around quickly, but there was no one. Daniel pulled my hand to signal to leave the cloth behind. I did as he said. As soon as the cloth fell to the ground, the blue light faded gradually. The whole space was engulfed in darkness in that moment. I clearly heard a sentence in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. Turn around, turn left. The real path is there. I knew I had just been lured into a vortex of conflicting words. We were stuck between fake and real paths, and it seemed like someone, or some force, was playing a game of chase with us in the Aokigahara Forest. And the next choice would decide everything, and the darkness was still waiting to reveal more secrets in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the arrows of phosphorescent green light flowed down from the tree trunks like living ink, constantly urging us to walk east. The roots parted into a small path, just enough for one person to walk through. The whispers turned into a repetitive melody like a creepy lullaby. Alex, I walked in front, the flashlight beam hitting the fog, creating opaque streaks of light. Daniel behind kept checking the GPS, but the signal was jumping around. The green dot was moving around as if someone was pulling it. Mia whispered that she felt someone walking parallel to her. Ethan turned the camera in that direction and the screen flashed. Briefly saw a figure in a dark coat. But when he turned back, there were only trees standing still. We continued walking faster. The path led into a low-lying area where the trees were sparser. The ground was full of sharp rocks. Many dark holes like well mouths. Each hole exuded a cold air. I bent down to look into a nearby hole and was startled when I saw dozens of crumpled pieces of white paper stuck to the wall rock. I shined the light and realized it was a moldy handwritten letter. The shaky handwriting told of someone's last days, begging for forgiveness and saying that they heard singing for many nights. I shivered and stuffed the paper back and signaled to continue. The deeper we went, the more caves there were. The sound of the wind disappeared, replaced by a soft moan as if someone was imprisoned inside. Mia burst into tears. Daniel squeezed her hand tightly. Ethan whispered that this was no longer a normal forest, but a cemetery hidden under the trees. I took a deep breath to calm the group, but inside my heart was also in turmoil. Suddenly, a cold wind blew. From a cave came a pungent smell that made my head spin. I saw an image flash in my mind, the shadow of a person hanging between the roots of a tree, eyes wide open. I closed my eyes tightly and shook my head to clear it. But the whisper sounded closer. This time it was not an order, but a cold question. "Why did you come?" I didn't dare to answer. Ethan brought the camera to record. The sound echoed into the device, into hundreds of sounds, then silently overlapping. Daniel growled that if we don't get out of here, that question will turn into a judgment. Then everything went dark. The flashlights all went out at once. Only a pale blue light flashed from the crevice. When the lights came back on, we realized we were standing in a completely different space. No more crevice, but instead a long line of trees hung with reflective tapes, exactly like the ones we tied to mark the path. But the number was absurd. Hundreds of strips glittering in the mist, like eyes staring at us. Mia screamed when she saw some reflective tapes with our names written in black ink. I was speechless. We understood that this path not only swallowed those who came before, but also remembered each person's identity. All the paths now turned into a maze of reflective tape, and only one brighter direction was waiting. That direction stretched endlessly. Like a basin, I knew for sure that at the end of it was an even more terrifying secret, and we would have to face it in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, we stood frozen in the middle of the maze of reflective tapes. The light from hundreds of wires sparkling in the mist made the scene look like a strange ritual every step. The rustling sound echoed as if hundreds of people were walking together. Daniel shined a light to examine each piece of tape. Many of the tapes had brownish dried bloodstains. Others had scribbled words in many languages. When I looked closer, I saw that there were also hastily written English lines like "Help me and I am lost." Mia trembled and knelt down. She muttered that someone had once found a way out using these very tapes, but was eventually swallowed by the maze. Ethan panned the camera along the endless line of tapes. On the screen, he discovered the shadow of a person walking ahead, walking slowly and with a hunched back. We looked blankly with the naked eye, but the camera recorded every movement clearly. I grabbed Ethan's shoulder and pulled the camera down, not wanting to make the group panic more, but at that moment, whispers rang out around us, this time no longer vague, but clearly formed into words. Turn back if you don't want to lose your name. I shivered before I could understand. The nearest reflective strips of tape began to shake as if there was wind, but the air around was still thick. Daniel growled and said we had to choose a single direction. Otherwise, if we stopped, the ice would squeeze us in. I swallowed hard, looked round. There was only one brighter path that stretched like a pre-illuminated path. I led the group to follow. The deeper we went, the ice seemed to grow taller, wrapping around the tree trunks to form a fence. We went between two cold, glowing walls. I felt like I was going through the gate of a training camp, except instead of safety, this place was filled with curses. The further we went, the more intense the whispers became, calling each person's name mixed with unclear words. At one point, I heard a short scream, as if someone was being pulled to the ground. Mia burst into tears. Daniel picked her up and ran after me. Ethan flashed his flashlight ahead, and we saw the end of the path was an empty space where dozens of wooden stakes were erected, on each stake hanging a personal item, from torn backpacks, frayed jackets, moldy sneakers, to even yellowed ID cards. I was stunned to realize that one of the cards had a picture of a young man printed on it. The name was blurred below, but the face looked exactly like mine. Like another version of myself who had been trapped here. Ethan gasped, raised the camera to record. The screen flashed a low battery warning. Suddenly, the ashes from the wooden stakes fell to the ground. Blue fire flared up for a moment, then died out. Cold smoke enveloped us. From within the smoke, the voice repeated again, this time echoing right in my head, revenge stories. Each word was like a knife carved straight into my mind. Daniel pulled us away from the stakes, but all directions led back to the same place. We were trapped in a loop. I understood that the reflective ice maze not only imprisoned the body, but also swallowed memories and identities. And to escape, we had to accept going deeper into the dark vortex, where the whispering voice was arranging a meeting in next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the cold smoke from the wooden stakes had not yet dissipated when we realized that the reflective ice maze was changing. The ice strips that had been hanging straight from the tree trunks were now twisted and intertwined like giant spider threads. The light from them no longer reflected evenly, but flickered like eyes opening and closing. Ethan muttered that we were in a living trap. His camera reported that the battery had only a few minutes left, but he still tried to record. The screen clearly showed blurry figures standing behind each strip of ice. Their figures were thin, their eyes were deep black. Some of them even had faces that matched Daniel and I, like copies lost in a loop. Mia trembled and held my hand tightly. She whispered that the others were whispering. I strained my ears to listen, and it was true. The sound came from all directions, sometimes far, sometimes near. The words repeated over and over again, with no escape. I used all my strength to pull the whole group through the maze. The ice threads hit my face, my shoulders cold as metal. I ran and felt like a row of dozens of hands touching our backs. We finally rushed into another clearing where the maze ended. In front of us was a small wooden bridge across a deep, dark hole. The bridge was rotten, the planks were broken, but it was the only way. Daniel shined his light down the hole. The darkness was so thick, I couldn't see the bottom. But for a few short seconds, I saw streaks of green light moving at the bottom of the hole like wandering souls. Ethan frowned and said that if we went through, we might not have a way back. I replied that going back meant death, because behind the ice was wrapping itself tightly. A high-pitched screech sounded like the sound of a stretched guitar string. We were forced to step onto the bridge. The wood creaked under our feet. Each step seemed to be measured. Mia walked and cried. Daniel walked behind, holding the light to shine on his back. A cold wind suddenly blew along the bridge, followed by a long whisper of true stories, as if all the stories of disappearances in this forest were gathered under the bridge. I felt the bridge shake violently. Ethan screamed and held onto the handrail, but the handrail rotten. The wood fell into the hole. The sound of falling was endless. I took a deep breath, walked faster. The light on the other side of the bridge gradually brightened. It seemed like salvation, but just a few steps away, a figure appeared standing motionless at the head of the bridge. Tall and thin, face blurred in the mist, but the voice was clear, cold. "Why do you carry my name?" The group stopped. I suddenly understood that the figure was one of the souls who had carved the name on the piece of cloth at the base of the tree. His empty eyes were fixed on me, as if demanding back the name that had been taken away. The bridge shook more violently. The wood cracked into pieces. If we didn't choose right away, we would be swallowed whole, both body and soul. I swallowed, held Mia's hand tightly, and decided to open my mouth, preparing to talk to the figure in front of me, because only that way would I know if there was a way to continue or just a path down to the abyss in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the figure standing at the end of the bridge was motionless, but its empty gaze made me feel like thousands of eyes were staring straight at us. The sound of wood groaning under my feet grew louder and louder. I understood that if we were late, the entire bridge would collapse into the dark abyss below. Daniel clenched the flashlight in his hand. The the light shining directly on the figure but not clearly illuminating the face, only revealing the edge of the old, tattered coat fluttering in the wind. His hoarse voice repeated once again, "Why did you bring my name?" I felt that the name was not a question but an accusation. The spirits in this forest considered names the only thing they could keep, and we had intentionally or unintentionally brought them with us on pieces of cloth. Ethan trembled and raised the camera towards the figure. The screen clearly showed each of its haggard features. Its eyes were empty but glowing green from within like cold embers. Mia sobbed. She begged not to come closer. I took a deep breath and answered that we didn't want to bring them. We just wanted to find a way out. The words just ended when the space shook as if there were dozens of broken laughter. The shadow took a step towards us. The bridge shook violently, causing Mia to fall to her knees. I pulled her up. Daniel shouted loudly that we had to run. Across immediately, the whole group gathered strength to rush forward. The shadow spread its arms as if to block. But when we rushed forward, it dissolved into mist. Only a pungent smell lingered. The bridge cracked and we managed to jump to the other side before the entire bridge collapsed into the abyss. The sound of broken wood echoed like the screams of souls in the depths. We gasped. The light in front opened a new, wider path. But the whole forest was absolutely silent. No more whispers, no wind, not even the sound of our own footsteps. That silence made the skin numb, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Ethan checked the camera and found that the recorded file had been erased. Only a line of text appeared on the haunted screen. I realized that we had passed a gateway first, but the forest doesn't let up. It's just leading us deeper into the innermost layer where the ghosts hold the true secrets of Aokigahara. And to know what awaits, we're forced to move on in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. We stood on the other side of the collapsed bridge. Our breathing still heavy, the four of us looked at each other in silence. No one dared to speak for fear that even a loud sound would awaken something lurking somewhere in the mist. The road ahead opened wider. The trees were sparse but tall. The leaves intertwined to cover the moonlight. Only a pale light like phosphorescence covered the ground. I walked slowly, step by step. Each dry branch broke under my feet like the sound of bones cracking. Ethan took out the camera to check again. The screen was blank with no footage, only a single character repeating like the code E. Daniel sighed. He said that this thing was not simply erasing data, but as if it was trying to rewrite the story. In its own way, Mia quietly walked close to me. Her hands were cold. She whispered that she heard people walking with her, but it was not the three of us, but a larger group. As if there were dozens of invisible footsteps around, I stopped. Listen. The rustling of leaves really did not match our rhythm, as if there was a group of people lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, from afar, flashed a faint red light, like a campfire. The whole group's hearts skipped a beat because we had seen a haunted tent before. Daniel tightened his flashlight and walked quickly. When he got closer, the red light turned out to be coming from hundreds of paper lanterns hanging scattered on the tree branches. All flickering in the wind, the red light dyed the forest into a surreal scene, evoking a feeling of both festival and mourning. Mia covered her mouth and sobbed. She said these lanterns were often used in soul-sending ceremonies. Ethan turned the camera around, but on the screen appeared the silhouettes of dozens of people in white standing among the lanterns, while the naked eye could only see empty space. I clearly felt the cold breath on the back of my neck. A whisper rang out in English, but broken, as if from a bleeding throat. "Camping is over." My spine shivered. It felt like the forest was announcing that our journey was now just a funeral rite. 4 people crowded between the rows of lanterns. Each one had a scribbled letter. One had Alex's name, another had Mia's. I trembled to understand that the forest had prepared a farewell ceremony. For each person, Daniel angrily shouted and broke a lantern. The red flame went out, but immediately dozens of others flared up fiercely. The wind rose, followed by a hoarse scream, like 100 voices in unison. Ethan shouted for us to run. But where to run when the forest was filled with only red lights and white shadows? I held Mia's hand, my heart pounding. My eyes swept over and saw a small dark path between 2 ancient trees where there was no red light nor white shadow. I shouted loudly for the whole group to rush into it, leaving behind the sound of broken lanterns, screams and red light flooding, and I knew the path we chose would be no less terrifying. It was just another path that the forest was preparing to continue the game of death in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, we rushed straight into the dark alley between 2 ancient trees, leaving behind a sea of red lanterns screaming like 100 voices combined. The path was so narrow that only one person could walk. The branches and leaves scratched our skin painfully, but the group did not dare to stop. I was in the lead. The dim flashlight light reflected on the moss patches like distorted faces. The sound of footsteps echoed in the terrifying silence. Mia held my hand tightly, her eyes filled with tears. Daniel followed right behind and kept turning his head back. And Ethan tried to record while walking, but the camera made an unusual buzzing sound, as if someone was whispering right into the lens. After walking a while, I saw the ground change color. The damp black soil turned into a thick carpet of dry leaves. The footsteps were crisp, but what made my hair stand on end was the sound was out of rhythm. Every step we took was another step that sounded half a beat later, as if someone was walking right behind. I turned my head to look behind me. There were still only Daniel and Ethan. No one else. I turned back and was stunned. On dozens of old and new footprints appeared on the dry leaf carpet, some as small as children's, some unusually large and long, all pointing deep into the road ahead. The whispering sounded again, this time clearer, male and female voices, old and young, repeating incomprehensible phrases, but one sentence rang out most clearly: revenge stories. Mia burst into tears, saying that they wanted us to tell it for them. Ethan stiffened. He panned the camera to the ground. On the screen appeared blurry figures kneeling, as if crawling along the footprints. I shouted to turn it off, but he held on tight. His eyes panicked. Suddenly, a thick fog rushed in. We were covered in opaque white. Visibility was less than a meter. Strange footsteps rushed in like a crowd of people surrounding us. I clearly felt every breath blowing against the back of my neck. Daniel swung the flashlight around. The light swept across a tall and thin figure standing motionless in the middle of the road. Bright blue eyes in the fog stared at us. The figure raised its hand slowly, fingers pointing straight ahead where the pale yellow light had just flashed. We didn't know if it was an exit or another trap, but behind the whispers turned into a roar that made the ground shake. I knew for sure if we didn't continue, we would be swallowed right there. I grabbed Mia's hand tightly, shouted to the group that there was no other choice. and we rushed towards the yellow light, like running into the belly of a giant monster, where an even deeper secret was waiting to be revealed in the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the pale yellow. Light ahead led us out of the thick fog, but at the same time opened up an even more creepy scene. A wide circular clearing surrounded by towering tree trunks, the branches of which were full of old metal wind chimes. Each time the wind blew, the ringing sound was not like a normal bell but like someone's muffled groan. The ground was covered in ash. There were deep footprints, as if groups of people had knelt here in despair. Daniel swept the flashlight around, and we were stunned to see countless old photos scattered all over the ground. The photos were faded, blurred, but still recognizable. The faces of people who had disappeared in this forest. Many were torn in half or burned in half. Ethan bent down to pick up a clear photo, but as soon as he flipped the photo, a line of scary, bold black ink appeared on the back. I felt a chill down my spine. It felt like the photo itself was warning us. Mia whispered that each photo was like an invisible tombstone. I hurriedly pulled her forward, but the wind chimes rang out in unison. The sound was piercing, long, harmonizing into a terrifying chord. Each note seemed to drill straight into our minds, making us dizzy. I held my head. Daniel screamed loudly, trying to keep his balance. Ethan staggered and fell. The camera fell out. The screen flashed, showing dozens of people kneeling right next to us. Eyes wide open, faces lifeless. But when I looked with my naked eyes, there was only ashes and darkness. The whispers rang out this time in unison, no longer far away but right in my heart. The voices forced me to leave my name, leave my face, I trembled, realizing that the forest was collecting the identities of those who were lost here by their images and names. If we stayed, our photos would soon appear in the ashes. Mia collapsed. I pulled her up. The whole group rushed to the opposite side of the clearing. The wind chimes behind rang loudly, as if sending them off. The pale yellow light gradually turned into blue, coldly opened another path. And I knew that behind that green light was where the real answer was hidden. But at the same time, it was the final challenge before this forest swallowed us, to know what was hidden behind that curtain of light. We were forced to enter the next episode. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk we walked through. The green light that opened behind the ashes and the wind chimes. The path ahead was long and endless, like a tunnel leading underground. On both sides were crisscrossed tree trunks, the roots sticking out like arms trying to grab our footsteps. The flashlight light cast distorted shadows, stretching into distorted shapes that stuck together. Ethan walked behind, his camera still buzzing with static. The screen flickered with the word "true stories" repeating over and over. Daniel gasped. He said that the deeper he went, the more he felt his memory empty. Memories of his family, of his childhood, seemed to be being erased by someone. I also began to notice the void in my head. Some trivial details disappeared. Only whispers took up the space. Mia sat down in the middle of the road, holding her head and screaming that she heard her mother calling, a familiar but distorted voice. Daniel and I quickly pulled her up, but at that moment, a strange little square opened up in front of us. In the middle was a giant ancient tree had dried up. Hanging on the body were wooden masks, dozens of them. Each mask carved with a different face, some with a crying face, some with a smiling face, some with a distorted face. Blue light emitted from the empty eye sockets. The whole group stood still when they realized that some of the masks were exactly like our faces, so detailed that it looked like they were carved from our current expressions. Ethan panned the camera to record, but as soon as he did, a series of masks shook simultaneously, emitting a hoarse laugh. The space shook like a living temple. I tried to take a deep breath, picked up a stone and threw it hard at a mask. It fell to the ground and broke. But inside was not solid wood, but a layer of dry skin like a mummy. The pungent smell immediately filled the air. Mia collapsed. Daniel pulled her back, and I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. Only other masks shook more violently. The whispers mixed into a single sentence, leaving names, leaving faces, leaving memory. I knew that we had reached the true heart of the forest, where the boundary between the living and the dead was no longer distinct, and if we were one step too late, our names would be engraved on a mask that would hang here forever. I shouted for the group to prepare, because the next path would decide whether we escaped or became a permanent part of the forest, and the final secret would be revealed in the next episode.